Welcome to the English League final of this third edition of the Debates League. First of all, we would like to apologize for the delay and the technical difficulties we have encountered during this league's edition. Today, Team B is facing Team C for this league's final. Now we will proceed with the delivery of positions. So, can one person of each team come, please? Who would like to choose one? Please say out loud your position.
Against.
In favor. Now the teams will have 5 minutes to start preparing the debate, and then we will start with the introduction of the team in favor. Thank you.
This morning, The Sun published a report where documents show and photos show that Greta Thunberg and her team have taken a total of 7 private plane flights to several destinations in Europe in the midst of the pandemic. Now, I know that your first reaction after hearing this piece of information is that you will fact check the information. And when you do, you will find out that what I just told you is a complete lie. A lie that took me and my team a lie that took us 2 minutes to fabricate. But did you know that according to a Signal Lab study, 86% of Americans do not bother checking their information nor their news sources? Did you know that according to the Russian Public Opinion Research Center, half of the Russian population is unable to distinguish between fake news and real news? Good morning, distinguished guests, honorable panel of judges, to the opposing team and of course my team. It is an honor to be here, especially when we have the privilege to debate against our classmates from JEL and our close friends who we love and admire. My name is Luisa Toledo, and alongside my team, Mirega Margarit, Nicolas Gamis, and Clara Luchetti, we'll be arguing that it should be the state that controls and labels the spread of fake news, as its social contract with its people obligates them to act as a guardian angel and therefore protect its citizens from false information and the consequent threats of it, and thus ensuring the well-functioning of a society. Fake news is a problem that is affecting our daily lives and communities and is hard to quantify, and whose consequences are still playing out in real time. However, according to a European Commission study, 83% of the European population can already identify fake news to be a threat to democracy. Furthermore, a Pew Research Center survey shows that 79% of US adults believe that steps should be taken to address fake news. Before we introduce our arguments, we want to begin by establishing the definitions of the terms of the question. So for starters, the definition of state. According to Weber, the state is a human community that successfully claims the monopoly of legitimate use of force within a given territory. This legitimacy of the modern state is founded predominantly on a legal authority that is a commitment to a code of legal regulations. This definition is the culmination of centuries of political theory. To add on, the term fake news is an oxymoron, given that news in itself means verifiable information of public interest. Therefore, fake news lends itself to undermining the credibility of information, which does indeed meet the threshold of verifiability and public interest. To add on, to label is to objectively flag particular stories or news pieces which have been scientifically fact-checked and an unbiased independent source has confirmed it to be disinformative. And lastly, to control is to supervise and oversee, to implement incentives to hinder the spread of fake news. We want to reiterate that control is not a synonym of prohibition, censorship, or limitation. And we want to restate the topic of the question. As we will be discussing the spread of fake news, we are not discussing the production of fake news. So allow me to introduce our arguments, which are a social argument that has 2 sides to it, a political and a social-cultural aspect, and a strategic legal argument. Firstly, the social argument is that the state should control and label the spread of fake news, as it is the essence of the social contract established by John Locke and the liberalism theory of statehood. And because the incendiary nature of fake news has negative repercussions in our society, as it creates misinformed and polarized citizens. For the strategic legal argument, the state should label and control the spread of fake news, as it is a way to ensure national security and protect information, given that it is the state that has the legal authority to act as an unbiased and trusted supervisor. So allow me to restate my main argument. It should be the state who starts to label and control the spread of fake news as their social contract with its citizens, obliges them to protect them and society from the dangers of false information. And lastly, I want to leave you with this quote: "Beware of false knowledge, as it is far more dangerous than ignorance," by George Bernard Shaw. Thank you.
On the 11th of September 2001, the entire world saw how New York was mercilessly attacked by Al-Qaeda. The collapse of the Twin Towers marked a before and after in history, a before and after in the Arab world. Since then, the entire Arab community has been stigmatized. A clear Islamophobia developed. An entire community, an entire religion, and an entire geographical area cannot be blamed for what a group of extremists did. We should be able to discern both realities, and though encompassed in the same geographical area, we should not put them in the same bag. From our jury opposing team, my team, Fernando Duarte, Manuel Ochoa, Luis Quint, Online, and I, Julia Vives, will defend the action's position. Just as the 9/11 attacks, the entire concept of fake news should not be judged based on two problematic ideas. A study by Sandock et al., published in 2017, examined 34 articles that used the term fake news between 2003 and 2017. News satire, news parody, fabrication, manipulation, advertising, and propaganda are all within the scope of fake news. In this debate, we will defend that labeling and controlling fake news is problematic due to the broadness of the term. To develop this idea, we will present three different arguments: regulatory, functional, and political. For the regulatory arguments, we will defend that fake news does not encompass the legal provisions. The term is too broad, covering several concepts from misinformation to disinformation. Regulating the whole spectrum creates an issue under international regulations, as states are not entitled to control or label fake news. To illustrate our point, we will use the Joint Declaration on Freedom of Expression and Fake News of the United Nations. On the subsection Standards of Disinformation and Propaganda, it is clearly presented as any general prohibition on the dissemination of information based on vague and ambiguous ideas, including fake news or non-objective information, are incompatible with international standards for restriction of freedom of expression. Continuing with the functional argument, labeling is not the most effective way to control fake news, as it creates counterproductive effects, such as the undermining of important information, backfiring, making someone entrenched in the current belief of fake news, and it is problematic to check the amount of fake news. For instance, we will analyze the implied truth effect demonstrated by professors from Yale, Harvard, and MIT, whereby false headlines that fail to get tagged are considered validated and thus are seen as more accurate. Furthermore, my colleagues will further support the argument with a different piece of information provided by Facebook. And last but not least, the political argument presents the idea that the control of fake news creates abuse from the states. Fake news and the broadness of the term create two types of abuses: accidental and desired. For the accidental abuse, we will present information from the Association of German Journalists. They highlight the reaction from journalists who refuse to publish due to any wrongful interpretation as a consequence of poor state regulation. Finally, the desired abuse. The Committee to Protect Journalists is an ongoing project that continuously publishes actions of wrongful enforcement. According to this international expert group, 34 journalists were imprisoned in 2020 around the world for the publishing of fake news. Through these three arguments, regulatory, functional, and political, we will defend that labeling and controlling of fake news is problematic due to the broadness of the term. Thank you.
After finishing the first introductions, we're going to start with the rebuttal. Anyone? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Clara Luquetin. Today I'll be the first rebuttal in the team in favor of why the state should start to label and control the spread of fake news. Firstly, we will introduce our social argument with the thesis of John Locke that inspired the theory of Weber. Firstly, we will talk about the state of nature, that humans are free and equal and have natural rights and freedoms. These rights need to be protected by someone, a state that guarantees them and is respected by the population. There is where the social contract comes in. In order to grant rights and freedoms to the population, liberal contract was established. Citizens created a new authority and gave up some of their freedoms in favor of power and law. The people that grant rules power in order to be protected. This is the duty of the state. They have to protect the citizens, as it is also stated in the Spanish Constitution. In the preamble of the Spanish Constitution, it is stated that the Spanish nation, desiring to establish justice, freedom, and security, and to promote the good of all its members, in use of its sovereignty, proclaims its will to guarantee democratic coexistence within the Constitution and the laws in accordance with just an economic and social order. Firstly, we'll get into our social argument that fake news production of wrongly informed citizens due to echo chambers and the psychological phenomenon of confirmation bias. And it is worth to say that fake news makes citizens less well informed, and this is well-informed citizens are vital to democracy. This is a factual foundation of our nation's consequence democratic health. Fake news are mostly incorrect, and we agree that they are bad. And we never said that there should be a prohibition of them. So they create echo chambers and they lead citizens to stay wrongly informed. This happens because false information is fed into self-informing algorithm and cognitive systems, or digital called echo chambers. Echo chambers exist where the information, ideas, or beliefs are amplified and reinforced by communication and repetition inside a defined system where the competing views are underrepresented. This is also called filter bubbles, and the result is users becoming separate from exposure to wide information that disagrees with their own views. So this is a psychological phenomenon called confirmation bias, or people's tendency to search, interpret, notice, recall, and believe information that confirms a pre-existing belief. This will be stated with Fox News evidence. For example, Fox News was the favorite media of Trump and his supporters 4 years ago, but the channel, which is presented as conservative, has seen its audience fall sharply. The cause daring to say that after the elections between Biden and Trump, that Trump didn't win. This was seen as a betrayal for Trump and his supporters, who rushed to the news Trump favorite channel, One American's News Network, a channel that was launched only in 2013 and which is already called the president's favorite channel. This confirms that people indoctrinated in their own ideas only look for information that confirms their ideas. And this has also led to conspirational theories, such as the QAnon, have succeeded with this movement in launching campaigns such as the takeover of the Capitol, etc., which has been very successful, as we have seen. Another second part of our argument, is that fake news emotional charge and provocative nature, which emotionally antagonists and ultras the citizens. This was stated in Usher's study that states that Facebook favors emotional content that hits people, whether it is true or not. Affected content, also called fake news, is designed to provoke emotion, and the consequence of this is less dialogue, a polarization, and distrust across different sectors of society. And this is a threat to society and democratic standards. Yes?
Yes, how do emotions can challenge the functioning of society?
Well, as you can see in our study made by the fake news and the economy of emotions, there's a problem that is caused, as I'll state here. Right now, that they provoke emotion, and we know that there's through emotion, as we have seen in the Capitol will take over, people through the emotion get to they do things that are completely against our view as they should be protected. So our argument for this emotions is also that, for example, we had this fake news that Hillary Clinton said in 2016 that it was deplorable, that Trump voters were deplorable, and this wasn't true, as she used this phrase of basket of deplorables. So this was used by Trump supporters and by some of the fake news media to appeal to emotion of those people, saying that Hillary thinks you're deplorable and the media thinks you're stupid, as stated by Breitbart in 2016. Another images also used this to urge Trump voters to vote. For instance, they incorporated Clinton's deplorable insult by saying that let's roll deplorables if we have to vote. So this is our reasons that the state has a duty to protect and use this, and this is provided by the social contract. The state has the duty to maintain the citizens well informed, and this is vital for our state. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, honorable jury and jail team. First of all, before starting with the rebuttal, I would like to point out that we have not received any sources of where you're basing your fake news definition from, so if you could provide one to us, that would be great. If not, we will continue to assume that we're debating under the terms of fake news as established by Tandock et al. Published in 2017, which refers to both misinformation and disinformation, and specifically advertising, propaganda, etc. So we will continue to debate along these lines. Secondly, we want to point out that both teams here are arguing for the same thing, the well-functioning of society, right? However, there's very different ways of achieving this, and we will prove that the state interfering in the control and labeling of fake news is not the correct way to do so. So they have presented two arguments. One, a social one about the contract and the state's duty to interfere and protect its citizens. Here we would just like to point out that we in no moment say that the state should not protect its citizens. Of course it should, that's vital. However, what is important here is that it should not control and label all fake news because the term is too broad. The problem at the moment is not everything established under fake news, but it is specifically propaganda and disinformation, as stated by our arguments, and we will prove through evidence, and again, as is defined by the definition we have provided. Second argument they have told us today is about national security and about how it is necessary that the state is the main actor involved because it is unbiased and trusted. We would like to ask the opposing team what happens then when the people under the government don't have widespread support for the government or do not trust it? Is then the state not going to interfere there? Then they talk about a confirmation bias, which actually we will prove through evidence that is actually made worse and backfires through the labeling and controlling. And before I start with our own arguments that will exactly rebuttal theirs, we would like to also point out that they have said that we will control and that by label we will have no elimination of facts, but they have not provided any clear methods on how they want to actually establish this. And then to their second argument, which was fairly elaborated upon, in terms of emotional charge, we want to ask, emotions and opinions are very linked, right? So are we then including opinions under fake news or not? Again, their definition is not clear, and so we can't really respond to it until they further elaborate. Now, in terms of our own arguments, we have seen three basic arguments that directly battle their thesis on how the state is going to somehow solve the problems that are happening with fake news. Firstly, we have said that there is a problem in terms of regulation. Why? Because the term fake news, as is understood, is currently too broad to be able to regulate. In accordance with the UN Special Rapporteur on the Joint Declaration on Freedom of Expression, it directly says that it is the human right to impart information and ideas that are not limited to, and I quote, correct statements. It says prohibitions on disinformation may violate international human rights standards because they are not compatible with restrictions of freedom of expression as set out in paragraph 1A. Then in 2018, January, we see that the European Commission set up a high-level group of experts to advise on policy initiatives to counter harmful information spread online deliberately. And said, and here I quote again, the problem is disinformation specifically, not all fake news. So again, we would like to take in mind that yes, we do want to protect society, we do want to help, but the problem is not all fake news, it is specifically this part. Secondly, to our functional argument. It is simply not effective to control and label. Why? Because the process is not reliable in itself and creates problems. Firstly, we see the implied truth effect. False headlines that fail to get tagged are wrongly considered to be validated, and is thus seen as more accurate. Secondly, the process itself backfires. Why? Because it intensifies selective exposure and makes people more vulnerable to polarized opinions. So their whole thing about polarization, again, is in our favor. They say this, a study by Facebook says that flagging wasn't effective because by having labeled things with strong wording, it actually strengthens someone's own belief. So what you mentioned about the confirmation bias is again debunked by this study. And it says that in research to label or not to label, in this article found that stamped labels actually facilitated the spread of fake news. So this is such a problem, don't you see how this is becoming worse? And thirdly, fact-checking itself is problematic. To our third argument about the political and democratic aspect of it. It creates abuse from the state on two levels. One, intentional, and two, accidental. In accidental, we see that this provokes a vacuum of information, as is very clearly said by the example of German Federation of Journalists that refused to publish because of the threat of the information being identified as problematic under Germany's law. And secondly, it's intentional because, for example, the Russian law defines fake news broadly to include anything socially significant disinformation that may interfere with state interests. So do you not see how this would be a problem? Thank you.
Thank you for the first rebuttal. We will now proceed to the second rebuttal.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicolas Ramez. I'm the second rebutter for the team against. I would like to thank for the team for. I would like to thank the team against for other contributions to the debate. But I would like to highlight the base problems of this debate. They've said that labeling is problematic, and they've implied that it shouldn't be done. It shouldn't be done. They don't propose an alternative. They just propose that fake news be left out in the open and nothing be done about it. They ignore completely our definitional control and actually imply that our definition, which I will state again. We stated that control simply means to supervise and oversee, to implement incentives to hinder the spread of fake news. They've put words in our mouth like general prohibitions. We have not said anything of the sort. They don't tackle the idea of the state and leave it up in the air, which we have prominently put. This is what gives legitimacy to the state for it to enact certain regulations and to then interfere, if needed, on the subject of fake news. Our definition of the state is dependent on their social contract, and this is exactly what brings me on to their functional agreement. Yes?
Yes, can you explain how does labeling affects the correct functioning of society, which is what your, or how does it helps?
Without Weber's whole theory, as well as Locke's, was founded on Kant's theory of community, in which the community deemed themselves to be put in groups, themselves voluntarily for the well-functioning of society. This then gave Weber an opening to establish that this creates a collective legal body that needs its own rules. This is what then we know to be the state. And then the state successfully claims the monopoly of legitimate force, legitimate being the laws. It's all connected, it's all circular, and it's well established, and it defends. Yes.
The question was if labeling and how does labeling and not any other method affects that function or helps in the functioning of society.
Without it, there wouldn't be a society because we labeled ourselves. We put ourselves in these communities. Without them, that wouldn't be possible. Onto their regulatory argument, they essentially established that fake news was too broad. They themselves admit that it's an impossible term to defend. Then I'm curious, how does the EU define it in the regulation? How does the EU then present factual evidence, legal evidence, to try to control it? If the EU doesn't define it, are we here Europeans living in a utopia where the EU Commission has not put us in a frame, as we've suggested, that this frame is what keeps us alive? Because it is this frame, and I've proven with our third and final argument, that leads us to the lives that we like to live, and more importantly, require. Our last argument is that of a legal strategic one, in which the state simply is for the sake of national security, they level the playing field in the value of information and the promotion of cooperative values. Legal backing, as we've already established through the social contract, grants the state the power to be a trusted supervisor to its people, being transparent, comprehensive, and prepared, as to not act as a vigilante. The social contract grants it jurisdiction and, moreover, grants it the legitimacy needed to do so. Our first example comes from Europe, in a Europe fit for the digital age, through a directive on the security of network and information systems, the NIS, which has already been implemented as of 2018. Yes, your question.
So what happens in the cases where the state abuses its power? Is it no longer then entitled to the social contract? Is that what you're saying?
No, because the people are part of the social contract. The people have a say. It is therefore circular. Ergo, you are agreeing with my point, because without the people, there would not be a state. As I continue, the member states' preparedness in this directive, the member states must be prepared for them they need to be appropriately equipped informatically, and it creates a culture of security across sectors which are vital for our economy. Among them, financial markets, transport, banking, water, healthcare, and digital infrastructure, which are all necessary for our safety. And this is what enables us to continue to live in a society as we do and prosper. Article 7 establishes, through its Article B, a governance framework to achieve the objectives and priorities of national strategy on the security of network and information systems, including the roles and responsibility of the relevant actors. Therefore, the relevant actors in this case being the state. And this would like to bring me on to the concluding argument to complete what they said. They have essentially not given a definition of state and have gone on to prepare that it was the government. That is the government's responsibility. The government is simply an arm of the state. You have brought up the people, we bring it up. The people are part of the state. The government is part of the state. Defined territory is part of the state, and the monopoly of force is part of the state. It is not only one, and it is not only the other. They are not exclusive, they are complementary to one another. Without them, society does not work. And this establishes a legal framework like in Europe to address fake news. And these are possible policy actions at the EU level, in which the EU still wants to commit to its Article 2 human rights. Article 1, the entire charter is based on the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU and Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which creates a balance of the freedom of expression and the right to be properly informed, promoting pluralism. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Juan Ochoa, and a second rebuttal. I would like to start with one of the most important issues with the term of fake news, which is key to understand the control and label of fake news, and if it's the state, the one entitled to do so. So the opposing team just mentioned a brief definition of how fake news should work. Nevertheless, it was not refuted again in the second rebuttal what the definition of conduct is, which includes news satire, disinformation, propaganda, news parody, and a huge encompass of ideas. And the opposing team has based in two different arguments. So the first idea, and they base these two arguments to support their standings, which is that the social contract should enable the current functioning of society, which of course we are protecting as well. So the first argument proposes this social idea. So that by natural law and that by social contract, it should protect the state. Nevertheless, again, it was explained that as we are mentioning, we are as well protecting the state, but we're protecting what propaganda and what disinformation is, which is again just one point of the whole debate. And it is important to mention that propaganda is the one that is having this misleading. Nevertheless, news satire and all of them, they do not cause this harm to the society. So the second argument is this strategic one, which is about saving national security and to fight with it. But the strategy that they are actually saying is the introduction of labeling. And they mentioned this idea of control and not censorship. Okay, but when we mentioned about labeling, we presented one basic information, one basic evidence, which is the research made by Professor Rand from MIT with the help of Professor from Harvard. And what happened is that there is an implied truth effect. So when you label something, what happens is all the other information that is not being labeled, this creates this backfire effect, and it creates an implied truth. So labeling, it's not the correct way of protecting or enabling this social contract or the correct functioning of the state. So this is key, and they couldn't provide any other or any evidence that supports the idea of labeling. So there's the main point. So second of all, we are proposing these three arguments. We are proposing we are proposing a regulatory argument which completely enables or explains this why the state is not the one entitled to. And they mentioned that how is the provision or how does the European Union frame this question, or how does the European Union highlight this? And actually, In January 2018, the European Commission set up a high-level group of experts to advise on policy initiatives to counter fake news and how disinformation spreads. And actually what they defined is, I'm quoting, the problem is disinformation, not fake news. And this is how the European Union stated. This is the way that they are addressing to this problem. And it's actually what they mentioned the problem is, how the team is trying to enter to this debate. So this is, of course, I think our first argument, which is the regulatory argument. So second, about the functional, it has already been explained how labeling does not work. And actually, that's not the only research that it says this. As well, label or not to label, another argument shows this same idea of how it is not an effective way of fighting or combating fake news. So the third argument, which should be further explained, because they are mentioning that the state should be the one intervening in the society. And actually, that's quite a huge problem. And we presented two abuses. The first abuse is an accidental abuse, because they are not able to provide or use the spectrum that creates a problem and that not makes the correct functioning of the society, which is just a part of propaganda. What they said is that there are some journalists, in the example of Germany, and they didn't mention anything about this, and they refused to publish. And this is actually what happens a not correct functioning of society, and because of the broadness of the term. And second, a desired abuse is because there are countries that today use this broadness of the term and use them in their favor in order to benefit their interest. And what happened here is that there is evidence of how, for example, Egypt implemented the same idea. They just said in their laws that we should only protect what is fake news, and they use it to create negative intervention and to punish society. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now be having concluding remarks for the negative team.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Honorable jury members, opposing team, thank you very much for the opportunity to have this excellent debate. Now, first of all, I want to congratulate the other team on having a monologue and not engaging into any of our arguments whatsoever. Now, our thesis says, should the state label and control the spread of fake news? And we say no, because labeling and control is ineffective due to the broadness of the term fake news. Now, I want to guide you towards three main clashes we had in this debate. First of all, the definition. Secondly, what is better for society? Because obviously all of us want the best for society. And thirdly, why the state is the best actor for this issue. Now, first of all, you never engaged into our definition of fake news. You never debunked it. Therefore, we see it as satire, as memes, as advertising propaganda. And we see that some of this is bad. We see that propaganda is bad, but the term itself is too broad for you to issue labeling and control on the whole term itself. Now, secondly, what is better for society? You said that society will be polarized, which will happen without labeling. Now, we successfully rebutted that it will happen if there is labeling. And this is based on the Facebook data. Lastly, you said that you never said why the state is the best actor and completely ignored our facts based on accidental abuse and what could happen if the state intervenes in other countries as well as ours. Now, to tie it all up, I want to restate our thesis. Should the state label and control the spread of fake news? No, because labeling and control is ineffective due to the broadness of the term. We showed this in a regulatory argument, showing that the broadness of the term crosses into international regulation. We showed this in a functional argument, meaning that even if you successfully implement regulation and labeling, it doesn't work. It actually has a backfiring effect. And then we showed it in a political argument, showing that if we implement it, it might have a role model effect on other countries in a negative sense. This accidental abuse, that if we do something, a country with a less stable democratic system might abuse the broadness of this term to their favor. Our definitions were based on Tandock. Now, the same way you cannot judge the events of 9/11 on one religion, you cannot judge fake news as a term, as it is too broad, and any legislation would not be wholeheartedly and in the benefit for all of society. Thank you very much.
Good evening, distinguished jury, opposing team, and present public. In the first place, my team and I would like to thank all of you for today's debate. We are very happy to be here and feel extremely honored to be debating against our friends and classmates. I am Mireia Margarit, and I will proceed to conclude for the team in favor, explaining how my team has successfully managed to demonstrate why it should be the state who starts to limit and control fake news. The opposing team has based all of its argumental line based on linguistics, on the thesis that the term fake news, which we have actually defined in our introduction, is too broad. However, our team has provided a definition of fake news, by the way provided by UNESCO. This has limited the particular pieces of news which we refer to, and therefore which pieces of news our team successfully demonstrated to demonstrate why the state should start to label and control fake news. The opposing team has moreover tried to put words in our mouth and said that we're trying to ban, to limit, to prohibit particular pieces of information. However, we never said so. And again, as established in our introduction, in our definitions, we said that to control would be to supervise and oversee. Moreover, in order to try to answer to the question, should the state start to label and control fake news, the opposing team has been based on a misconception that the state is the same as the government. However, as we have repeatedly stated throughout today's debate, the government to which the opposing team really likes to refer to is just one of the many elements of the state. The state and the government are two completely different entities, and therefore, the state is the only completely independent, non-partisan, and objective, only completely capable of exercising such role. This, in fact, takes us to our first argument, which, through the concept of the social context by John Locke, explains that the state is not only capable to exercise such role, but it's moreover its obligation to do so, as citizens have consented to submit to the state in exchange for protection of their rights and maintenance of democratic standards, which again, fake news hinder. So while the opposing team has all throughout today's debate focused on linguistics and definition, our team has demonstrated why the state is the best actor to exercise such role and has moreover provided evidence of real countries, of real situations in which where this is happening and is being effective. However, the opposing team has provided a lot of criticism, but has failed to provide a particular alternative, which would be, they would say, is better than the state exercising such role. So in conclusion, while the other team has based its argumental line on linguistics on the so-called too broad definition of fake news, our team has constantly strongly rebutted that the state is not the same as the government, and that therefore it is the only party completely capable of starting to label and control fake news. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Team C. Indeed,
jury members, public. This is the end of the final English League tournament. So what are we gonna do now? We're going to present off, and we are asking to the jury members to go to the second floor, and the top left round table, 8 chairs. There will be Victor Guerra in there, and you have 10 minutes to deliberate. And as soon as those 10 minutes finish, we're gonna present back again, and you will have another 10 minutes to give feedback to both teams. Remember that you need to choose which is the winning team and which is the best speaker of the final. With that being said, we're gonna present off, and you can go to the center. Thank you so much. We're gonna start with the feedback.
No, feedback.
There's no feedback.
No feedback. The judges said that as you all know that if you want you can write them an email and they will personally write back and ask for the feedback.
Okay, so do you remember decided not to give feedback? So but it would be amazing if I knew who the winner is. Before knowing it, so well, first of all, before doing it's going to be super quite short. We wanted to thank you all for being here once again. The third edition. This has been a bit different one with the circumstances. We apologize back again for the technical issues we had during the tournament. But next year, we promise that the edition will be hopefully in person and way better than this one. That being said, we also wanted to thank all the sponsors we had, Dale Carnegie, Aranzadi, Mars, El Charro, Aguas en Cajas, Abacus, Óptica Universitaria, and of course, ESADE for giving us the possibility to take help the ESADE Debate League here in the campus. So, who do you think will have won the debate? let's keep it brief. There's gonna be one winner and one best speaker. So.
First speaker first.
Exactly. The first speaker has been from the team number B, okay? And the first rebuttal. So congratulations. Team number B, first we're gonna give it to you, and that you can open it. And now, what's most important? The team that won this third edition of the ESADE Debate League, and that team has been team number D.
Congrats, you made Pedro proud.
Well, first of all, like big round of applause for team members. And also another one for the third. This one, we have some from you. And perfect. So this is the end of the third edition of this tournament. So once again, thank you all for being here. This has been an amazing 2 days, and we hope next year you can still come. Both teams, you're gonna be able to come back again. So that being said, thank you very much, and see you next Friday in the Spanish final. Goodbye.